I hadn't run in 2 years. I hadn't done anything physical in 2 years. So you're talking about someone who was a former athlete on the U.S. archery team and then had done marathons and trained for the Ironman. And this next part is probably a bit too graphic. I started not being able to laugh, sneeze, cry, walk without basically weeing myself. It was absolutely awful. Welcome to the Dare to Be Brave podcast. I'm your host, Joy Foster, master neurocoach, life mastery consultant, and founder of the multi-award-winning TechPixies and the Quantum Leap Accelerator, a transformational leadership program for ambitious, high-achieving women who want to live a holistic life, one in which their career or their business flourishes while at the same time feeling healthy and happy in themselves. This show is for midlife women who want more and are ready to transform themselves. Each week, we'll explore mindset shifts, neuroscience insights, and real-life stories from women who've navigated powerful life transitions. As a former athlete turned accidental entrepreneur, I spent the last decade helping thousands of women return to work, change careers, or start a business. And now I'm helping women take bold steps into leadership and self-mastery. At the end of every episode, you'll get a brave dare, a specific, actionable challenge to help you move forward, heal, and take agency over your life. So recently, I celebrated my 46th birthday, and I was reflecting on what it was like when I turned 40. And I thought I would do a little podcast about that anticipation of turning 40 and getting older and that psychology of turning 40. For me, it was really scary. I loved being 30. I really didn't like my 20s. I had lots of ups and downs in my 20s. My 30s were beautiful. I'd just gotten married. I had 2 babies within 15 months. And, I decided that I was going to stay home. I was lucky enough that I could stay home and really be with the kids and spend a lot of time with them. My husband was doing a lot of traveling, so I was with the kids about 180 days of my daughter's first year and 150 days of my son's first year. I was on my own. So I really got to spend a lot of time with my babies, and that was a beautiful thing. I was living in a country where women don't typically go to work. I was living in Switzerland, and if you have a child in Switzerland, just for reference, for context, childcare in Switzerland is like 60,000 francs a year. So, you've got to have a really, really, really good job in order to pay for the childcare. And I was lucky enough that my husband had a great job and I could take the time off. And I was also in an environment where it was very highly encouraged. It was not an environment where both parents worked. So I got this beautiful, my 30s, I had some great friends that I met, and, I really enjoyed living abroad and learning a new language. And I was really involved in my church community. And so I had this really beautiful decade. And in that decade, we also moved back to the UK. I'm obviously American originally. My husband's British, hence why I live in Britain. But we moved to Britain sort of partway through my 30s. And I loved England. And I made really great friends here easily. And the kids were in primary school, and I had the school run with all the mums and everything else. And in my 30s, I set up the business that I now run, which is TechPixies. And I set it up because I could see that there were lots of women who had done what I had done and had taken time off to be with their kids. Now their kids were in primary school and they wanted to go back to work. I remember the day that I dropped both of my children off at school, and I thought, oh my gosh, I've got 30 hours to myself this week. What am I going to do with it? And so there was this really beautiful time in my life when I got to be fully focused on family. I got to build my business, and I got to do it from the kitchen table, all of those things. One of the things that happened, though, as I was attracting women into TechPixies, we started attracting a lot of women that were maybe a little bit older than me. So I was probably 35 when I started TechPixies, 36, somewhere around there. And we started attracting a lot of women in their mid-40s. And there was a real pattern that I could see with them, this sudden lack of confidence, this sudden struggle that they were having, and we were very lucky because we could help them. So the women that were coming in, even though they were 10 years or 15 years older than myself, I could use the neuroscience-based coaching that I had been certified in to help them change the way they were thinking and to help them to regain confidence through their thought process. And I didn't know what was physiologically happening to them. And of course, now, here it's 2025 when I'm recording this podcast, we have a lot more information about menopause than we had then. But it certainly was a subject that people were talking about in groups, but there wasn't any formal education, if you will, about it. And I think when I was getting closer and closer to 40, I was thinking, gosh, there's a lot of stuff that happens in your 40s, and I'm not sure I'm ready for that. And I remember on my actual 40th birthday, sort of not even really wanting to do it. But I had some friends that wanted to get together. They made a beautiful pavlova and came over and celebrated me, and we had a great day. But I remembered being really not happy about turning 40. And this was also before I had really learned the neuroscience side of things. So it was when I was at the beginning of building my business, about 5 years into building my business, we had seen life coaching and how life coaching had helped. So we were able to help people put together a vision for their life. We were able to get people to take action on that vision, two things I think are really important. And we were able to help people through life coaching to see that they had a lot of the answers inside themselves, right? And we'd identified certain things that really tripped women up when they went on social media, like things like imposter syndrome or compare and despair or perfectionism. And we were able to give them tools that would help them navigate that. But there was still this barrier when it came to the physiological stuff that was going on in women's lives. And so my 40th year was pretty uneventful, but when I turned 41, I suddenly started getting symptoms. Now, the interesting thing is at that point, some of the education around menopause was coming out. And so I was starting to read books, and I was starting to listen to podcasts, and I started to educate myself, partly because women in my community who were 10 years, 15 years older than me were going through it, and I wanted to understand it. But partly we had a lot of menopause coaches coming in to learn how to use social media with our social media program and our business program. They wanted to know how they could set up businesses as menopause coaches, et cetera. So I really educated myself on it to really understand what was going on. And at 41, the thing that started to happen to me was I was running the London Marathon. I had just done the London Marathon that was in 2020, which was the largest online running event in the world. So I'm part of the Guinness Book of World Records for this online event. Anyway, I had run that marathon. I had just done an Ironman for my 40th birthday. So in the build up to my 40th birthday, I promised myself over 4 years that I would train to do an Ironman, which I did. So I did super sprints when I was 36 and 37, 38. I was doing Olympic sprints. And then 38, 39, I was doing half Ironmans, and then the Ironman in Wales. And I was really fit and really healthy, and I looked great. I felt great. It was easy for me to run and cycle and swim. And at 41, all of a sudden, I'm training for the next marathon. I was doing it again. The first time I did it for Save the Rhinos, and I was training again to raise money for Save the Rhinos. And I just one day on a run, my knee just really kicked in, and it really, really hurt. And I thought, okay, something's wrong. I've done something to my knee. So I walked home and gave it a couple days rest, tried to go for a run again. It still hurt. And I ended up having to pull out of the marathon, which was really unfortunate because I was really looking forward to doing the actual London Marathon. And I gave it a couple weeks and it still was hurting. I gave it a couple months and it was still hurting. And eventually I just sort of gave up on running, which was really unfortunate because I really liked it. And then one of the gals on my team sent me a podcast. It was Dr. Mary Claire Haver talking to Stephen Bartlett, and she was talking about frozen shoulder. And she was saying, when your body starts changing, you start getting calcium deposits in your shoulder, and that's what creates frozen shoulder, which is that inability to sort of, you lose the mobility in your shoulder. And I thought, gosh, if you can get calcium deposits in your shoulder that freeze your shoulder up, surely I can get calcium deposits in my knee. And so I went back to the doctor. This was probably at about 43. And at this point, I hadn't run in 2 years. I hadn't done anything physical in 2 years. So you're talking about someone who was a former athlete on the U.S. archery team and then had done marathons and trained for the Ironman. And, here I was, hadn't done anything in 2 years and was quite demotivated actually as well. And I went into the doctor. He said, let's go and do an x-ray. So I went and got an x-ray, and turns out I had calcium deposits all over my knee. And they just said, oh, you've got osteoarthritis. You're a former athlete. That makes sense. You've worked really hard on your body's worked really hard, and you probably just worked it too hard. And they gave me a couple of physiotherapy sessions, which hurt like hell because my knee was not feeling great. And so having listened to this podcast episode, and I thought, well, let me find out about this HRT stuff. I tried to get the doctor at my GP surgery to prescribe me HRT. She said no because I was too young. And it turns out that there is such a thing as early menopause, which happens between about 40 and 45, which is exactly when it happened to me. And so I went away a bit frustrated, a bit annoyed, and I tried to soldier on. And now this next part is probably a bit too graphic for some of you, but this is what happened to me, and I want to make sure that you know that this can happen so that you can do something about it and you don't have to suffer like I did. Certain things started happening. Sex with my husband became really, really uncomfortable. I started not being able to laugh, sneeze, cry, walk without basically weeing myself. It was absolutely awful. And I was waking up drenched in sweat. So like night sweats, hot sweats. And then during the day, I would be taking the dog on a walk and I would suddenly get really faint and like I was going to pass out. And the only thing that would make me feel better was eating, and I thought that was because my blood sugar levels were dropping, and so eating seemed to make it better. I was one time walking the dog, and I had this happen, and I called a friend of mine because she lived across the street, and she said she wasn't home, but I could come by her house and eat. They had grapes outside their house. I could come by and eat all the grapes outside her house, and that's exactly what I did. So these things started happening, and it was really tricky. And and the doctor was saying, I'm not going to give you HRT because you're too young. So there was a period of time where every time my husband and I would be together, I would get thrush, and I'd get it really badly. And then there was this one period of time where I got thrush for about, like just nonstop. It was almost like recurring thrush. It was really, really bad. And so I contacted the GP surgery, and I said, I need to meet with a particular doctor, because there was a doctor I knew there that I'd worked with my children, where he was sort of the kind of doctor that would figure it out. Whatever you needed to figure out, he'd figure it out. So I called him and I said, and I got an appointment with him, and I went into his office and I was in tears. And I said, this is all the stuff that's happening to me. And the other doctor won't give me HRT. I absolutely 100% need HRT. And here's why. And I had read all the books. I read Dr. Mary Claire Haver's book, The New Menopause. I'd read The Menopause Brain by Dr. Lisa Mosconi. I'd read Davina McCall's book on menopausing, which has like 79 different types of symptoms that you can have. I also had dry eyes. I would wake up in the morning, I still do, with really dry eyes, lack of libido, all of those things. And he said, okay, I will sit down with you and I will figure this out with you. And he prescribed estrogen because I was on the Mirena, which means that I had progesterone already in my system. So they gave me an estrogen pill. I did that for a couple years, and then I went back and I said, look, I really need to fix the libido issue. I really need to fix that. And the problems I was having below, the pain, the thrush, all of that hadn't gone away with the estrogen. What had gone away was the night sweats and the day attacks that I was having, where I was having those what felt like low blood sugar attacks. That did go away with the estrogen. But what was not going away was some of the other stuff that I was dealing with. And he then referred me to the menopause clinic, which was amazing, because then I got the support that I needed in terms of the whole situation that was going on. So I tell you this story because I think it's really important for women to know that, yes, while going into your 40s can be daunting. And yes, you are probably going to hit menopause, whether that's in your late 40s or in your early 50s. The average age is around 49 to 51 or 52. So I did get it early. And I think it's important for you to hear this, because one of the things that will happen, and it's been massively misdiagnosed, women will go in and share their symptoms because the first thing that happens is they start feeling a bit off. Like for me, it was my knee and the pain in my knee. And it was masked in something that you might think was just a knee injury. But for you to have the courage, right? This is a podcast about bravery, for you to have the courage to be brave and to understand your symptoms and to walk into the doctor armed with knowledge and information about you and your situation, and to be able to say, this is what I need. That takes a lot of courage. And that's certainly what happened to me. I really had to I made the decision that I was going to stand up for myself. I was going to advocate for myself. I was going to learn everything there possibly was for me to learn, to be educated, to get on the right path of treatment for myself. So if you're listening to this and you are daunted about going into your 40s, let me just encourage you that while it may be daunting, while it may be scary, while it may be something that you don't want to do, I do feel like it taught me a lot about standing up for myself. And here I am at 46, having gone through that whole journey. It was not a comfortable journey. It was quite painful, and it's not all completely fixed, but quite a lot has been addressed. And I know there's some of you listening to this that can't do HRT, and you don't think that that's the answer for you, or maybe you don't want to do, pills, medicine. I get you 100%. There's this amazing woman named Laura Lamb, and she runs programs that are specifically for women who don't want to go on HRT. But what I will say is if you ignore it and you don't address it, it will just get worse and worse and worse. And you'll have whatever symptoms it is that you're going to have, you'll have them. So I guess my big advice here, and we want to bring this back to some steps you can take so that you can move forward. The first step is educate yourself, right? If you're heading into your 40s, educate yourself. Dr. Lisa Mosconi says the best thing you can do is have a conversation with your mom. Ask your mom what her menopause journey was like. Now, unfortunately, I lost my mom, my biological mom, to cancer in January of 2024. And so I didn't get a chance to ask her what her menopause journey was like. But she probably would have had a very different experience than me anyway, because she had a hysterectomy, which pushed her into a medically induced menopause. But I did talk to my biological aunts, and I asked them what their experience was like and what they went through. So get up the courage to talk to your mother or your biological aunts or biological female relatives and ask them what their experience was like. They may not feel comfortable talking about it, but if you can get them to talk about it, their chances are you may have some of the same challenges that they have. The second thing is, like I said, read up on it. There's so much information now. It's actually almost overwhelming. You can listen to podcasts. You can read books. We will link to the books and the podcasts that I talked about in the show notes. I found them extremely, extremely valuable when I was educating myself. And then the third thing is write it down. Write down what all your symptoms are and go into the doctor's office very informed as to what's going on with you. And I literally walked in with all the books and I'd marked them up, and I had, underlined the lines that were important where Dr. Mary Claire Haver said, if this is what's going on, this is what you need. I'd underlined all of that. I had sticky notes and I was armed with that information. And I found a doctor who listened to me. And I think that's the last piece of advice I would say is if your doctor doesn't listen to you, go get another one. You do not have to go and tell someone who doesn't believe you that you're going through perimenopause or menopause. You need to go to someone who's going to support you, who's got your back. And that is being brave. So my dare to you, my brave dare this week is if you are worried about going into your 40s, or if you are in your 40s and you are experiencing anything that I talked about, take the time to educate yourself, to arm yourself, to walk into that doctor's office and defend yourself and get the right support that you need. And if you don't get it, don't stay with that doctor. Go to another one. There are lots of doctors out there that care and they want to help you. And so the last thing I would say, and this is really important, many, many, many women, when they go in to talk about their symptoms, will be told that they need to go on antidepressants. There is a massive oversubscription of antidepressants at the moment because doctors are solving this problem with antidepressants and not with HRT. So if you're listening to this and you think, actually, I probably need to go and talk about that, that's something you need to really address, because I see it all the time with the women in our community. There's an overprescription of antidepressants and not treating the real issue. So I know that's a big deep, heavy thing to throw at the end of this podcast, but it's one last thing I wanted to make sure that we addressed, because depression is one of those things that can really come out with perimenopause and menopause. And I don't want you to feel like you don't have the right support. So don't give up on yourself. Make sure you get the right support, and make sure you get the right doctor that's going to work with you and help you navigate this. Thanks for listening, and I'd love to hear your story and any feedback you have. You can email us at support@techpixies.com, or you can comment below this podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Dare to Be Brave podcast. Make sure to rate it and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. New episodes are dropping each week, and I can't wait for you to tune in next time. Until then, be brave, and thanks for listening. Bye for now.